Well, welcome everyone. Who has ever been on a podcast as an interviewee or interviewer?
It was a podcast
Were you interviewed on it? Okay. And down here? Both. You interviewed and interviewer. Okay, so you're a seasoned professional over here. Security, please remove this guy. So, a little bit about me. My name's Stefan Sojka. I run a little digital media company in West Ryde, do a lot of work locally called Serious Media Group. Part of that is a little recording studio, and I've done quite a few podcasts. The Skeptic Zone, which is the one up there, that's a photo from show 500. It's now up to show, I think, 570 or something. But that was since they changed the name to the Skeptic Zone. We actually started in the year 2000. I also do one called The Science of Safety. Medical Observer magazine, I was producing a podcast for them for quite some time. Employsure was another company. I did some corporate podcasts for them. And a psychologist got me to create a series of podcasts called Psych Bits, which was aimed at teenagers and adolescents to sort of help them navigate through the trials of life. I was a DJ on Australia's first internet radio station, Net FM, in the year 2000. I've done lots of voiceovers, trained at the Max Rowley Media Academy. Anyone heard of Max Rowley? Anyone over 50? Max Rowley speaking. And in 1976, I entered the 2GF Grafton Junior DJ competition and failed miserably. But it was a baptism of fire, so at least I learned something. That's my little studio there, and another angle there. That's where we do all the recordings and stuff, little vocal booth in the corner there. Right, so what is a podcast? Can anyone help define one? What is a podcast?
It's a radio show.
Basically, that's all it is. It's a radio program. It's a pre-recorded radio program. It's an audio file. Before the internet, that's what it was called. It was just a piece of audio. And it's interesting that it's called a podcast because it was called a podcast because of iPods that no longer exist, almost. So it's now, I mean, they should rename it, but it's too late. But podcast is an audio file, and it's basically a series of audio files. So a podcast tends to be multi-episodal, but you can have a single episode podcast. Why not? Just do one and see what happens. Couple of facts we'll just go through. It's booming at the moment. This year has been absolutely crazy. Have a look at the stats there. Since 2014, it's gone from 980,000 Australians listening to podcasts in 2014 to 1.66 million. But you can see if you look at downloaded podcasts to computer are actually going down, and mobile phones are just rocketing up. So it's really becoming a big thing. Here's some demographics. Surprisingly, the biggest cohort of podcast listeners are Gen Y, which is surprising because it's sort of like audio you think is an old people's format really, but they're really loving the fact that they can just shove an ear thing in their ear and listen to it on the train or whatever. So they're really getting into the podcast medium. We're listening to podcasts, 49% at home. I thought the car would be a bit bigger, but 22% in the car, and 3% jogging, 4% at the gym, that kind of thing. But still, people are sitting at home listening to podcasts in general. A couple of things about the activity. Podcast listeners surprisingly subscribe to an average of 6 different shows, listen to 7 shows a week. 19%, like 1/5 of all listeners, boost the speed so they can just digest it quicker. Now that's a very Gen Y thing to do. Yeah, and it's awesome, isn't it?
Well, this is a bit much, but your brain gets used to it.
You get used to it, and you can see how fast you can go.
So I listen to talking about music, and then I was like, well,
Yeah, slow. When they play music, a piece of music, that's right. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. The people, they're really, I mean, that's a sign that they've got a huge appetite for it. They really want to digest the content. And they're spending an average of 6 hours, 37 minutes a week listening. And this is sort of about, from the marketing point of view, how much difference it makes with the podcast, with people's intent to buy. So when people are listening to news and politics podcasts and someone advertises in there, there's a 12.8% lift in the purchasing intent. So that's quite interesting. Comedy, sports, business. I mean, it speaks for itself, but business, as you can see, the highest of all of those for uplift in intent to purchase from advertisers, which is converting to a huge revenue growth of podcast advertising. I mean, there's entire platforms now that are dedicated to feeding ads into the podcast universe. Yeah, I mean, look at that, 69 million in 2015. That's just massive, really, the growth at the moment. Some of the benefits of podcasting, I mean, they're all there. You can read the slide. But if anyone can think of anything else, benefits, promote your business, promote causes, ideas, or your philosophy, help people just with advice and information, personal branding. It's a way to define yourself more, having fun, following your passion, opening doors. I mean, one good thing about podcasting, if you invite someone onto a podcast, you're building a relationship with them, and I'll tell you a bit about that with one of the case studies. Yeah, so it's a way to engage. Yes.
I think importantly, the one you said, have fun. If you're not enjoying podcasts, you're not going to keep doing it. So that's, for me, I'll put that as priority one. Just have fun, follow your passion, and then let the podcasts come around you after that.
Number one, yeah. I've got another case study where without that, it just wouldn't happen, but with that, it has longevity.
Also, it's not going to happen. You have to, if you hate coming every Tuesday to your studio to record, you're not going to do it long. No.
If it's just a trial and a task, you're not going to do. By the way, do we have a second mic or anything? Is it just in case some? Because we are podcasting apparently, so we want to hear it, which will go into audio issues later. But yeah, if you got any questions, jump in. Opening doors and attracting networks. I mean, that's one thing that Jan from Council down here knows about. If you just put yourself out there as a podcaster, people come to you and you open these doors and you make relationships and people start to come and they think, well, that's because everyone's looking for channels and opportunities to connect with audiences. So if you've created one, they come knocking on your door, which is kind of a reverse of most advertising where you're banging your head against the wall. And branded content, it's a good way to kind of tell stories like we heard about before, but through the podcast environment and promote your brand. And very at the bottom, because it's really hard to do, is earn money from podcasts. Like, yes, it's building, yes, it's growing, but the cost of doing it and all that, it's hard to earn money, but people do. Okay, we're going to do a bit of technical stuff. Has anyone tried recording? Have you tried to create your own?
Okay, so now there's sites like Wix, you can press add app and just put in podcasts, same on Squarespace, so there's no reason anyone with a website can't have a podcast. And also you can buy now microphones, USB ones that plug straight into your laptop and you can start recording, you sound perfect. A Rode microphone is $100 or so. So there's no really reason why we shouldn't be doing podcasts, especially if you've got some. If you
so what's your podcast about?
At the moment, I used to be a radio show host for many years. So I was doing music and events. Mm-hmm. Now I'm in the fitness industry. So the next podcast that we're planning at the moment is all about fitness technology. So it's about the next steps of the Apple Watch and what's happening in gyms and trends and that as well. But the way we're trying to structure it, because half our team's based in Europe, so we've got teams in Poland and Germany that I'm working with, it's all about trying to make it a bit fun because their English isn't the best and just have fun. That's what we're doing at the moment. So at the moment, we're just recording with ourselves. I'm more featuring on podcasts at the moment. Yep. One's called Sports Tech X, Sports Techie. Yep. So I've been on that recently, but in doing that, we've just been recording ourselves at the moment. Haven't published anything to the masses. It's just been more a bit of a fun. Yep. Instead of having a Skype call, record it. It becomes a podcast.
And you've got yourself the basics of a podcast.
Yes, you do.
Okay, hang on to that because you might have to throw it to someone else. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of technical stuff. Like, now, I'm not an audio engineer, but I've been doing audio recording and stuff for longer than I care to remember. So I'm only going to cover some of the real basics because if you want to know more, it's a very complex audio. is like video. It's a science essentially, and it's very, very complicated. But there's some basic things you can understand. I mean, just even looking at that picture, you can see there's decibels, which is sound pressure level, and it's a logarithmic scale. So as you get further away from sound, it diminishes more than just linearly, it diminishes logarithmically. So decibels are very important in the whole recording process of getting good levels, making sure that here's a perfect example. I'm talking now. If I just go like that, I've moved it hardly away from me, and it's a huge difference. And these sort of considerations are the sort of things you have to think about when you're making a podcast. Someone's doing an interview, and then they turn their head away, they're talking away, and you're recording that, and then they come back, and then like this, and then they're talking like this. Next minute, you've got a horrible recording, and you can't really publish it. So you've got to consider these things. Do I get a different microphone to compensate for that? So we're going to talk about just a couple of technical things. Polar pattern. So there's many different polar patterns, but we'll cover the basic ones. Omnidirectional is essentially, this is an omnidirectional mic. You clip it here, and it picks up everything around it, and doesn't matter where you put it. And the reason why it's like that is because it takes into account the fact that people move their head around, and it'll still pick up pretty much the same level from the same distance. So that's omnidirectional. Bidirectional, these sort of microphones, I haven't got one with me because it's more for like instruments. If you're recording a guitar or something, you want to pick up a more broader reflection of the sound that's coming through. So you use a bidirectional microphone. Cardioid stops the sound coming from behind the microphone, so it's more directional. Yeah, this is like a cardioid microphone. It probably is too, yeah. Because if I go like this, it's not going to sound real good. So as you can see from the picture there, if this was an omnidirectional microphone, you'd hear that'd sound just the same here, but it doesn't. So that's cardioid. Supercardioid really crushes the sound behind, and that's more like a live microphone. If you're in a situation where there's lots of noise coming at you, there might be a fold-back speaker reflecting the sound back. You don't want that to pick up because that'll feed back. So supercardioid and hypercardioid are like that's even more so. More like for live, but if you're podcasting, you might be in a situation where there's lots of noise coming. You don't want anything coming at you from there. And then shotgun is like this sort of microphone. This mic, if you're not right in that area here, you'll hardly get anything. And that's really good for cutting out everything that's going around outside and really focusing on the person speaking. So these mics are used a lot in voiceover work and a lot of studio work and even externally, movies and stuff, where they're just going, I just want to pick up that sound right there, and they'll pick it up. If you move it there, it's gone. That's a shotgun mic. Different microphone types. That's the old style ribbon microphone that they used to use back in the 50s and 60s. They're not really so much in use now, but they're often used for instruments, but we won't really need to go there. The large diaphragm condenser microphone is like this type. If you can see inside it, it's like quite a large circular thing, and it's almost like your eardrum, but it's a big one. So think of it like a large animal, like a tiger or something. It's got a really big, sensitive eardrum. It's picking up everything. It takes a bit of power from the electronics, and it will. These ones are very sensitive, and you can put them anywhere. Even if I'm talking into it here, it'll pick up the traffic outside. It's just really, really sensitive. But the benefit of a large diaphragm condenser is that it really picks up subtleties and makes a voice sound very warm and very present. Small diaphragm condenser, that's what these things are. They have the same sort of intensity, but you can control them a little bit more. And even these things, they're a small diaphragm condenser as well. They boost the sound, they make it sound very strong, but they're quite concentrated. Lavalier, that's these little ones. Apparently lavalier is French for like brooch or something, or medallion or something. So these are the ones they're omnidirectional, but they'll sit on your lapel and pick up everything there. So they're quite good too. And the thing is with podcasting, you've got to choose your microphone according to the situation. There's no point going, if I went to an event with this and started interviewing people, all you'll hear is the guy making coffee in the next room. You won't be able to separate the sound because it'll pick everything up. Whereas a dynamic mic like this, you really need to be close. So it doesn't matter what's happening out there. I can talk to it really closely. Yep.
I think just for all us that are starting out, the lapel on your guest's collar somewhere, because they're going to turn their heads 90% of the time. So I found that as well. I tried the other microphones. I found that sticking it on their chin somewhere, putting some tape on their shirt, that's the best fail-safe way for people starting out.
That's right. Yeah, no, lapels are very, very, very good. The only thing where that's not going to work is if there's too much outside noise, or if you're in a studio that's very quiet, you don't need it. You can bring in something like this because it's nice and quiet and you'll get a good sound. Whereas the sound of this is going to be 10 times better than the sound of the lapel mic, but you're right, the lapel mic will solve most of your problems.
For everyone starting out.
Yeah, especially if you're just starting out. Well, although these things aren't that expensive, so you can have a couple so you can pick and choose. This is a Skeptic Zone collection over the years, all the different ones that we've used. There's iPhone mics and all sorts of things there and little Zooms. If you're really serious, you'll get something like this. This Zoom has got 6 different inputs. It's even got adaptable heads, so you can change between omnidirectional, condenser, dynamic, shotgun, or you can just plug whatever mic you like into it and it'll record 6 different tracks. So you could have an interview, a panel interview, and everything you're capturing individual voices, which makes it very easy to edit later. A lot of times if you're doing an interview, if you're mixing everything to stereo and someone coughs or does something silly or says the wrong thing while someone else is talking, it could ruin the recording. So by having separate tracks and having the right microphone, it makes it a lot easier to edit and get a good end result. This is the Procaster Rode microphone. These ones are meant for this kind of situation where you just sit here going, hi, I'm hosting this podcast and here we are today at the Venture Café. It's all very wonderful. Captures it very nicely. But the H1N is a similar one to this. It's a sort of thing you can use anywhere and it'll pick things up and very easy to use and quite affordable as well. The H1N will give you an SD card. You can just throw it onto your computer and do the editing. A couple of other little things, noise floor and compression. Compression, as you can see, a compressor takes the loud stuff and just makes it closer to the quiet stuff. So if you have someone's yelling really loudly, then they're whispering, in an audio production environment, that makes it very difficult because people are turning their volume up and then they get their heads blown off. And so compression brings it all more unified volume and that helps a lot for the overall quality of recording. Noise floor is every microphone. Like if I turn this microphone up a lot right now, you'd hear like all sorts of noise going on. The whole objective of a good recording is to keep the difference between the noise and the signal you actually want to be as big as possible. So even being in a quiet room, using good equipment, making sure that within they call it the signal chain, when something's being recorded, if you turn it right up at the beginning, you're introducing noise at the beginning, and then you get to the next stage and you're in your software and you turn it up again, and then you output it and turn it up again. The noise is getting amplified as well as everything else. So what you try and do is keep the levels nice and low, right through and controlled, so that when you master it, the noise is reduced as much as possible. And that's the worst thing that happens with podcasting. People, they record in a loud room, they record with the levels too low and the gain too high, and you end up with a bad quality recording.
The question was, is there a optimum ratio between the signal to noise in terms of intended signal
Okay.
and background.
From my point of view, it's as low as reasonably practicable. You just want to make it as low as possible. So, yeah, I don't think there's any like standard. It's just you go for the best.
So for example, in this situation where you're speaking and then people come in and out of the place, the banging of the door needs to be as low as possible compared to your.
That's right. That's the whole thing about the noise floor. So that's where you choose the best microphone. So I'll if I'm in a noisy environment, I'll choose a microphone that needs to be much closer and doesn't pick up anything behind me. Like this mic's actually quite good because that's not picking very much up at a distance. But if I had a mic that picked everything up, that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a choice of microphone is one of the main things around that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Yep. That's what I use to edit, to record Logic, where you just hit record and record the channels. This is a program called Isotope RX7, where you actually see the recording and then you can edit it accordingly. For example, this probably is someone going like this, and it's coming out as a sound, and so you'd probably try and reduce that a little bit. Here, the guy's mobile phone went off. Like it went bzz, like here, and in a really nice clean recording, you can hear that. People are listening to these podcasts with headphones on, and they'll go, "That's a bit weird. My phone's going off," you know. So those sort of things you can actually go and clean up. There's another program called Ferrite, which is very simple on the iPad you can use if you want to. The Skeptic Zone uses that. And there's a new one called Anchor that's, they're trying to make things really easy to create your own podcast, but being really easy, they don't give you a lot of flexibility, but it is pretty easy. And what they're doing, they're trying to monetize podcasts. What they've set up is the ability to create a podcast and then the ability for them to sell advertisers into your podcast. So it might be something you're interested in. And there's this one, the Rode Podcaster Pro, I think it's called, that supposedly you can just plug everything in and just make a podcast. Now, yes, you can, but with that, they're taking a lot of the complexity away, and by doing that, you don't have much control. So if something goes wrong, you're sort of stuck with it. But it is actually quite powerful, quite flexible. You know, plug a lot of mics in, do interviews. They've even got little buttons there you can hit the theme or sound effects and stuff like that. It's limited, but if you're just getting started, it's a pretty good idea. Okay, types of podcast. You're probably aware of some of these, and they've all got pros and cons. A solo podcast, easy to do, just do it yourself. Sit there at home, talk into a microphone. Like, you'd have to be pretty interesting to do that. But, you know, if you have a lot to say and you really want to make that happen and you want to, hey guys, I've just got all this stuff for you to know about, then a solo podcast is good. Pros of that, easy to do, very little editing. You don't have to manage anybody, you just do it yourself and you put it out there and see what happens. Cons are, you've got to keep it up. You've got to have good content. That's very difficult to do if you're solo because, you know, how much does the world want to hear what one person's got to say? Probably not that much. Interview podcasts, they're pretty popular and they're quite a good way to go because the host can kind of engage lots of different people. They can invite different guests in, they can make it interesting, and then you could have a theme where different guests come in and bring their expertise in. The downside of that, if you're doing interview podcasts, you've got to book them, they've got to be available, you've got to line them up, then you're responsible for what they record, and if they say something a bit funny, you've got to be very aware of that and edit that out. A lot of people just do a podcast, record it and publish it, and then find, oh, I shouldn't have done that because that person said something they shouldn't have said, like I'm probably doing today. And you've got to give your guest the opportunity to edit it. Otherwise, you know, you're putting them in a bad situation. Panels are equally good. Good thing about a panel, you get a bit of chemistry. You've got, you got different dynamics going on. It's more a live environment where people are sort of bouncing off each other rather than working to a script. And that can work really well. Again, with a panel, you've got to wrangle people and you've also got to to worry about what they say, and you've got to be in control of it. And if you're running a panel podcast, you've got to be almost like a producer / manager rather than just someone who's just hitting the record button. Co-hosting is very good, but you've got to find a good co-host. You've got to find that chemistry. You've got to have someone you can bounce off that works well with you, and maybe you're the serious guy, they're the funny guy, or you've got to have that sort of dynamic combination going. But that can work really well. A lot of the big radio stations, they rely on the co-host thing because it works. Two people bouncing off each other is entertaining. Non-fiction documentary, of course, plenty of those out there. Lately, they've been really quite popular, murder mysteries and all those sort of things. The only downside, if you want to do a non-fiction documentary, generally the production value is a lot higher. You've got to do the research, you've got to make sure your facts are right, or you could get sued, and there's a lot of things around that. So if you want to do a non-fiction documentary, do it, but be aware of the risks. Fiction, of course, you just have fun with that. That's like the good old radio play style where you just tell a story. You might have different characters and you can just be creative. Downside of that, it's got to be good, And there's other ones like variety. You can have a podcast which has just got all sorts of stuff on it. We're going to have a song and dance, and we're going to have an interview, then we're going to have a bit of fun, then we're going to have an interlude, then an advert. The old variety format is quite good. You can also look at a themed niche or local podcast where you're really targeting something specific. I mean, think locally. We could let's have a podcast where we just bring all guests in for all the local organisations and what's happening this week kind of thing. That can work quite well. A review one where all you're doing is just reviewing stuff. That's kind of easy because if you have a good one, people will send you stuff. And you don't have to really think. You just, hey, I'll just review this new product or this new service or whatever. And if you're good at it, that can work quite well. And of course, comedy. Well, yeah. A couple of little things that I've done. The case study at 3M, they're up to 70 plus episodes. They've published 50, so we're about a year old. Now, this is very specific. It's aimed at industrial workplace safety. That's what the podcast is about. So the number of downloads is not so much important as who is listening to it. And 17,000, their feedback is they're all key industry people and employers, and that's working really well. They're targeting very specific safety issues, asbestos, silica dust, falling from heights, all that sort of stuff. And they keep it very tight, 20 to 25 minutes long. I'll tell you a little bit about this podcast. It's a corporate one, so it's 3M. So every word has to be approved by legals and marketing and corporate. So the process of creating this podcast, they'll set up the interview. The host is a staff member of 3M, and he'll line everything up. We do the interview. We record it. It's not live. We record it. We edit it down to the basic, what was said without all the in-between stuff. That has to be transcribed. Then the transcription goes to the guest and to 3M, and it has to be approved by everyone. Then they send back edits of the transcript, and then I have to edit according to the Word document, every word, to make sure it's exactly right. And then it's mastered, and then it's output. It goes through their marketing department, and then it's quite a process. But it's what you have to do if you're doing a corporate podcast. You've got to do that, and even the transcript becomes search engine optimization because it's a lot of text that gets into Google.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Yes, yeah, go for it.
How long did that process took?
We work about 3 months ahead. So what I recorded yesterday, I'll edit it and send it to them within a week, and then it goes off to transcription, and then so it's about a 3-month process. But it works with that sort of buffer and that review process, and very strict as well. You end up with a really good corporate result. Guests who stutter, but they know what they're talking about, and we have to edit it and make it sound like they're not stuttering. They know what they're talking about, and Like we had one guest that we took 3.5 minutes off the podcast length of just ums and ahs. And it's a huge difference, and it makes it more listenable. And yeah, so anyway, let's go back to play. Sorry? Yeah, we have to. Yeah. But without it, it would be a poorer quality end result, and they need it to be really, really good. So yeah, and also they are they're networking with their guests. Like they want their guests to sound good. So if their guests are umming and ahhing and stuttering and they cut that out and make them sound great, it's a good outcome for everyone. So we're out of time? Yeah. We're nearly there anyway. So hang on, I'll just go play from Currents. The Skeptic Zone is an amateur one, but it's been going for nearly 20 years, 3.8 million downloads, 25,000 listeners, and it's a very different environment, but it's, yeah. Anyway, there you go, Q&A. I was ready for it.
I have the first question. Where did the long hair go? I can see that.
I've gone corporate.
Sell out. Yeah. Does anyone have a real question, though?
How do you find sort of, where was the threshold from promoting it to where it got well enough known that it kind of, did it ever sort of percolate itself out, or was there lots of cross-promotion with other
Good question.
podcasts?
Okay, the successful one, which is this one, the Skeptic Zone, like the 3M one has been going for a year, and it's just starting to get the traction. They're getting the guests in there, because it's sort of like the network effect. Like a podcast on its own, I mean, you listen to it, whatever, right? But if you have the right guest, they share it on their networks, on their LinkedIn, on their Facebook, and then the next one, you start to build a momentum. The Skeptic Zone, it was a really long haul, and Richard, the main guy, he just does a production every week for the last almost 20 years, right? So it's a real long haul, but it's consistency. You've got to keep... What? Yeah, Maynard, yeah, he's on it as well. Yeah, Maynard's, yeah, he's on there. He's sort of replaced me lately because I sort of pulled back a bit and he's jumped in. But basically, it's consistency. With podcasts, one of the keys to a successful podcast, you just got to keep doing it. And eventually, with the guests and the listens and the occasional episode that goes a little bit viral, that's where you get your return.
Hello. In terms of the ums, is there like an easy way to get rid of them that isn't sitting there and splicing audio?
Not really.
Is there like this AI tool that you can just like get rid of ums?
This is Venture Café. Let's develop one. Get it
Okay.
funded. The remover. I think we should do that because I tell you, I know. And the other thing I have to add about podcasting is, as easy as everyone says it is to do, it's not that easy. Yes, you can just grab a mic and go for it, but you've got to have media training. You've got to be able to speak clearly and confidently and know what you're talking about. And you've got to, there's a lot you've got to know and experience to make it work. And people who just think, we'll just throw it together, it doesn't go over very well.
So maybe what we could do another night is we could do a quick little podcast, like maybe a 15-minute where we record it and get you guys to actually be part of it.
So we are recording right now as well. So what I will say to everyone here and to everyone listening to the podcast is thank you so much to Stefan for coming along and doing this session today, and for everyone here who's enjoyed it and being a part of it. I encourage you to stay around, ask questions, find out more. He's brought his whole toolkit, all the tricks. They're all here. So please do. And thank you to Stefan for being such a good host. Thank you.